Okay, so it is May 21st, 2015, and it's Judy Ridner and Michael Murphy, and we are here interviewing Joyce Allen of Starkville. So Joyce, what we usually do with these interviews is we start with, we kind of go where you want to go. Obviously, we want to talk about Starkville and the kind of the civil rights era writ large, but we usually start with asking you some biographical information about like when you were born, where you were born, kind of who you are and who's your family.
Okay. Well, my name is Joyce Allen. I was born here in Starkville in 1960. And for the majority of my life, I've lived in the Octok/Ebenezer community. And I've had periods in my life, of course, where I've lived away, California, Georgia, a couple other places, and done a lot of travel around the world. I'm excited about that. And I have one daughter. She's a student here at Mississippi State now. And currently, I don't know if this works, but she's also running for Justice Court Judge.
Oh, is she really?
For District 1 in Starkville, so new history being made.
That's great.
So that's
great. And so now, who were your parents?
My parents were Roy and Inez Allen, and in their early working years, they both worked here at the university.
Okay. And what did they do?
They both worked, well, my mother worked for the laundry, and then she worked for the cafeteria. And I think my father just worked at the cafeteria as far as I know. And then my grandfather, who is Jesse Vaughn, my mother always told us when Mississippi State was first being built, you know, of course, they didn't have the large bulldozers and earth movers that they have now. Individuals leveled the land with mules and that type. My grandfather was one of those people who initially did the foundational work for some of the buildings that now are here.
Probably like 1880s, 1890s, or early 1900s. Well, that's neat. So it sounds like your family then, or it's your mother's, it sounds like your mother's side of the family, old Starkville family then.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So back into the 19th century.
Yes, and prior to that.
And wow. Okay, neat. And so let's see. Did you have a lot of siblings? Do you have any siblings?
I have one sister, and I have two brothers. My sister lives in Georgia, and both brothers now live in Georgia. And that's it. Not a large family. So there are two girls and two boys.
Okay. All right. And so what do you remember about growing up in Starkville?
My memories of growing up in Starkville are, I guess you would say, they're good memories. I refer to them often. I tell my daughter stories a lot about growing up here. I don't have bad memories of anything, you know, that you would say would cause an individual to say, that's a part of my life that I don't wish to revisit. I guess at the time that I grew up, my parents would have been considered middle class, I would imagine, because they did own, at that time, you know, a reasonable amount of land, and they did own a few businesses as time went on. And my oldest brother graduated from Valley State University, well, Valley State College. My other two siblings graduated from Mississippi State. And of the four, I was the only one that did not graduate. So I'm going to be returning in January.
No, did you start college?
I did.
And did you start?
I did. I went here for 2 years, and the desire to see the world and just live life on my own terms just overtook being in school. And I like the choice. I don't have any regrets. I like the choice that I've made because I've done a lot of things in life that a lot of people say, how did you manage to do all this? But that's just kind of how I do it. You know, I just have my own agenda.
So can you, thinking about, so I know where Octok is, but I'm not entirely sure. Can you describe for us a little bit about where is the Octok community, and like where could we find it on the map in relationship to the rest of town?
Well, I guess the best way I could tell, we are 2 miles south of the campus on Octok Road.
And you're all on Octok Road?
All on Octok Road.
Yeah.
And for people who know where Memorial Garden Cemetery is right now, I guess that would be maybe where the beginning of October would be. I'm not sure, because I have had this discussion with the history people here in town at the museum, and everybody's a little vague on what exactly, where October begins, but we're definitely clear on, where it is.
And it goes from Memorial, the cemetery, up to basically to campus.
Well, it goes from the cemetery further south down to
okay, gotcha.
the turn that would go to Moore High School.
Okay.
So I guess that would be, I don't know, maybe 10 miles.
Okay, yeah, that's a long stretch.
Long stretch.
And so what do you know about the history of that part of Starkville? Was that traditionally an African-American community? Or was it mixed? What do you know?
What I know about it is it was the hub of the dairy industry in Oxabaha County. And at that time, of course, there were mostly white families that owned the major dairies. However, the black families worked at those dairies. And then, as time progressed, my father became a dairy farmer. And so at about maybe 12 to 15, we were living the dairy farmers. Good. But my brothers did more work than I did, so that was good. And I think what prompted my father to go that direction too is, I guess he saw the success that was being had by others. And then at that time, he was no longer working here at the university, but he started to work at the Borden plant. And I'm not going to say he was the first black person hired, but he was probably in that first group of black people hired to work at the Borden milk plant.
So now, do you remember how, were your parents always landowners while you were growing up?
Always, always.
And had their parents, like your
My grandparents were always landowners as
So
well.
that's good, that's good.
And then my great-grandparents were always landowners.
Yeah, so you have so there's a real tradition in your family of independent landowners.
Absolutely. So my siblings and I, we're still trying to continue that. Today, it's just that we now know that we can go beyond October, because there's land everywhere.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's perfect. October's perfectly nice, but there's more elsewhere.
Right.
Okay. So now, I remember when we met you about a month or so ago, you had talked a lot about growing up, how it sounds like your mom was real involved in some of the activities around civil rights protest in Starkville. And so can you talk a little bit about what you remember regarding that? And what was your, again, I'm thinking off of your family here. What got your mother involved? What was your mom, how was your mom involved in what was going on in the town?
I think the way my mother became involved goes back to maybe my great-grandparents. My great-grandmother, who was Lee Etta Vaughn, was what we would call today biracial. And her husband, of course, was, just traditional African-American man. And I think at that time they saw how there was a difference in how certain blacks were treated and related to as opposed to others. And of course, being a parent, you never make a difference in your kids because maybe one has one shade skin as opposed to another. So my great-grandmother at that time, she was considered an educated African-American woman, and she taught other blacks. She taught school, which was something that was at that time somewhat rare, I guess. She taught school. The current church, Ebenezer, that's on October Road, I think she was one of the founding members for that church, and I think one of my grandparents donated the land for that church to be built on. And when my grandfather was born, which would have been her son, he was an extremely fair-skinned black man. So much so that people always thought he was a white guy. And all of his siblings looked the same. But then when he married a darker skinned lady. So then their children were, this is just a hodgepodge of from light to medium to dark. And I think that's kind of maybe where it all got started, where my grandfather wanted to stress to all of his kids that they all had worth and they all had value.
Right, right.
And because of that, my grandfather and my great-grandfather, my sister and I talk about this to this day, we never knew them to ever have a traditional job like most black people. Everything that we've ever known or heard about them, they work for themselves. And I think I kind of picked that up from them somewhere along the way. My grandfather owned the community grocery store. So people in the community, when they didn't have actual cash to come into town to do grocery shopping, they would purchase with him. And he would allow them to charge groceries, and then they could pay him.
Credit, like a store account.
Right.
And was this out in October?
This is out in October. And he always had an extremely large crop of something, of some type field or garden. And growing up, we always saw other people working for them. And then my grandfather was very famous for his barbecue and for making sorghum and Louisiana molasses. So of course those are really, really, really fun times. And he was one of the few that I can recall, and I'm not going to say there weren't others, but we followed him around everywhere. And he had a way with all people, and especially whites, and I think that's why a lot of blacks and a lot of whites maybe thought that he was white. I don't really know. But when it was time to do the sugar cane for the molasses, it would just be tons of white people that would come to help him work. And matter of fact, it was documented in Starkville Daily News. I think it was in 1966 maybe, not sure. But you'll see a picture of my grandfather and a couple of the white guys that was working with him to do the molasses, and the picture of my brother.
A picture. And so can you give me a sense of, the article ran in the 60s. When is this time for your grandfather? When is that all happening? Was that happening in the 60s at that point?
Well, what I've just described, I think it was all pretty much happening in the 60s, except for what I was saying about my great-grandparents, because they died in either 68, 69, and then my grandfather, I think he died in 1975.
Gotcha.
But there was always a lot of activity around his house or around any of his enterprises. And my great-grandfather, again, he never owned a traditional business, but his business was always that of growing crops. And he was always able to supply, you know, immediate community and some people outside the community with produce and vegetables, that kind of thing.
See, sounds like he was a real entrepreneur,
right,
and also like a community, like a leader of sorts.
Exactly. And again, going back to the church, he was a deacon and a trustee at the church for a long time. And back then, in those days, that was, you know, people really looked up to that kind of thing. And he also owned a lot of cattle back then. And, you know, again, that was another thing that people thought, you know, set them apart. And I think my uncle, who was Clinton Vaughn, was my grandfather's son, my mother's brother. Again, I don't want to just say first because I was young then, so I haven't verified this for sure, but I think it's probably, he was the first franchise service station owner, a black person here in Starkville, Chevron station, that's on Highway 82. That's across from Henderson.
Oh, I never knew.
I think they use it as a car wash now.
And that's your uncle, that was?
Clinton Vaughn.
Clinton.
And
your grandfather was Jesse?
Jesse Vaughn, Sr.
And Vaughn, V-A-U-G-H-N.
Right. So to go back to your question, he says, how do I think my mother got involved? So to lay the groundwork for that, you know, it was my grandfather and my great-grandmother always wanting all of us to feel like we had value, we had worth, and that, you know, we didn't have to be defined by someone else's label. We could chart our own course. That was how it was. So in our house growing up, one thing that was discussed every day, that was politics and education. That was just the norm. Every day that conversation was had in some form. So I guess just, and you know, being a kid, I didn't know if it was normal. It just was the way that it was.
Right, it was normal.
So, you know, and then if we weren't being spoken directly to, you know, we're hearing our parents talking to people stopping at the house or people on the phone talking about different things and different events. So I think that's kind of how my mother got involved, and we just kind of morphed right on into it with her. And
so can I ask you, like, when you talked about politics and education, what kinds of things were you talking about?
well, a lot would center around voting, the importance of voting. And I remember the day I turned 18, when my mom picked me up from school, we went straight to the courthouse to register to vote. And I did the same thing with my daughter. The day she turned 18, I took her straight to the courthouse to register to vote. They always talked about the importance of voting. They always talked about people that were currently working, and I'm going to use the word the cause, and that is, you know, gaining equality and rights for African Americans. They always talked about how important that was, and that if we didn't take action, or if we didn't speak out, or if we didn't have a voice, then all of this work would go in vain. And then, of course, at some point, a story would come out about, oh, I can tell you about my Uncle Abraham, or, you know, some kind of story. And that kind of tied it together to make you say, well, okay, this must be something I need to get involved in. And then when Starkville approached integrating the schools and boycotting stores so that blacks could have jobs in the banks and in retail establishments, that was accomplished, you know, from my memory, through a lot of boycotting. And that was when my mother would get us up on Saturday mornings. And like I said, I was about 8 years old. And we would go downtown, and all the instructions would always be, you know, make sure you stay in the designated area, don't break any rules. And they would give you these really huge signs to put around your neck. And you just simply walked up and down the street for your allotted period of time, you know, with whatever your signs did. So.
Do you remember anything about the signs?
I don't, you know, and I've thought about that a lot, and because I know it was never a sign that I made, so.
Right, somebody handed you a
Right,
sign.
somebody just handed you a sign. So, no, I don't, because at that time, I don't even think I knew what I was doing. I think I was just doing it because my mother was doing it, and I saw all these other people that I knew that was doing it. And I liked it. Well,
No, why did you like it?
Well, I liked it because, I don't know, I felt like I was doing something important with the grown-ups, I guess.
Yeah.
I think that might have been what it was the most.
Yeah. And so this would have been right around 1970, probably?
In the 60s.
In the
probably,
60s.
Probably in
So
the
even
late
a little
60s.
early. Okay. So you would have been maybe
8 or 9.
9, something like that.
Right, because by the time I made it to 10, which would have been 1970, I really don't recall a lot of controversy around the schools integrating. I think it was official, I think, in 1970, but I remember going to Overstreet in, I think it was 1967. And a lot of, because 1966, I went to the elementary school at Henderson, and that was first grade. But from second grade on, I was in what we now call Starkville Public School. And a lot of family, friends, and neighbors said, y'all must be crazy. Why are you sending those kids over there to that school with all those white kids, and there are no other black kids there? And then I think that was the counterpart where my dad would get involved, you know, because he was like the protector, you know. He was like, well, you know, he told us, you know, he wanted us to have a better education than they did. And if there was something better there, he wanted us to have it. And, you know, over time, we realized that we were glad that we integrated for the sake of giving people a choice, but we also realized, at least I realize now, we had just as good as schools. As if we may not have had the physical resources, but in terms of the intellectual capacity of the teachers, in my opinion, I think we had better. Because teachers then, not only did they teach you the academic that you needed to be successful, these teachers, because they were your community neighbors and family friends, these people develop a character and a value system in you that's not done, and that wasn't done when we integrated into the white schools. It was just strictly academics. So at the end of the day, you know, I am glad that integration happened so that people could have a choice. But do I think we gain anything better by integrating? I don't.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. Do you think, well, can you just backtrack just a hair? When you were in elementary school, where were you going to school?
I went to Henderson Elementary for first grade, and then started second, third,
Then you went to
I went to Overstreet. And I think at that time it may have been about 5 black kids in the school.
Oh, wow.
About 5.
And was that because, so do you remember what year you went to Overstreet?
It would have been 67, 68, and maybe 69.
Do you have any sense of why there were so few? Was this during freedom of choice? Was this during all the freedom of choice?
I'm not quite sure if that's what it was called. I just know we went, and a lot of people were like, why do you want to send your kids there, you know, and there are no other kids, so I don't know. And I guess my personality has always been, like, I'm not too much afraid of anything. So I remember the first day going in the class that I was in. When I came in, the teacher introduced me to everybody in the class, and you know, everybody was friendly. Nobody said anything out of the way or did anything silly. So she started to explain what their morning routine was. And she says, well, this is what we do when we start the day. And back then they had this set of cards called SRAs. I guess Scholastic Reading something.
I had them too.
Right, you know, they come in the colors.
Yes, I remember them well.
That was what we used, I guess, to determine or to gauge your reading level or your ability to comprehend. So she explained, you know, how when we come in the mornings, what we're supposed to do. Then we go to the back of the room, you pull a card, right? You sign out for what you got, and you come back and you read it, and you answer the questions, and, you know, you get your score on it, that kind of thing. Well, I remember when we all were lined up at the back of the class, everybody was pulling their little cards. So I don't remember how the colors went, but I think it was like maybe gold or something, or whatever it was something very high at the top, and a lot of people didn't get there. So I go and I pull the top card. So all the kids say, you can't do that. You can't do that. You have to start at this level, this level. So I'm going, but this is the one I want. And they says, well, no, that's not how you do it. You have to start here. And so they were all trying to show me that, oh, well, I'm at green, I'm at red, I'm at... So I said, but I want this one. So, you know, I guess I cut up so bad about wanting that one. So I guess they just said, well, okay, give it to her. And then when she can't do it, she'll put it back and get the other kind. But I did. And they were like, you can read that? But I've always been able to read. I've always been able to read. And I've always been able to comprehend things much above my peer group. And I think they saw me as some kind of weird black person that, like, well, where did you come from? You know, because we've always heard y'all are too smart. Yeah. But it took them a little bit of trying to figure it out, but they eventually realized, well, okay, I guess you can do it. And then it didn't become a problem too much anymore then.
Now, did you grow up with books around your house?
All the time, everywhere. And I'm like that now. Everywhere I go, trunk of my car, in my purse.
You got something to read.
All the time. And I'm sure in my house, I know I have over 5,000 books. I know.
Oh my God. Yeah, many more than I do.
I have books in storage, all topics. I'm a voracious reader.
And clearly your family encouraged
I do, and I did the same for my daughter. And the thing about her is, and I don't know why it was on the day that she turned 2. I said, Jess, we're going to go to the bookstore today. For your birthday, we're going to let you pick out some books. And I'll never forget, we went to the Book Mart on Main Street, and she picked out a book about a black ballerina and 2 other books. And when we got home, I said, well, let's read the books you picked. So I read the first book, The Ballerina, because that was what she said she wanted to hear. And I'm playing with her, and I said, here, you read it. So I just passed the book to her. And I kid you not, and everybody in Starkville will tell you, they will tell you the same thing about it. I gave her the book, and she read it. And I said, I can't believe this. How does she know how to read this book? So I just started calling people on the phone. Y'all won't believe this. So my sister said, maybe she just memorized what you said. And they said, give her another book. So we just started running all over the house, and she was reading the books. And people started saying, well, you should get her tested. They sent me to the W. The W tested her. They says, well, she's definitely way beyond anybody 2 years old. So then they sent me here to a psychometrist, and then state referred me to the psychometrist for public schools. They brought her in, and the lady said to me, she says, well, we're going to ask you to sit outside. You can't come in, because parents always say that their kids are smart, even when they're not. I says, okay, I warned you. And so when they come out of the room, they said, we don't have anything to measure it. Say she went off the chart. We don't have anything to measure it. So, you know, we've just, it's like learning. That's why I know now why I never completed school. It was too slow.
Yeah.
It was too slow.
And you were frustrated.
Right.
And so you wanted to see other things.
Right, right.
I
couldn't figure out then. Back then, I thought I was losing, that I wasn't winning. But now, looking back, that's how I was better able to help her, because my parents didn't recognize I was gifted. They didn't know.
Yeah.
They never heard of that.
Yeah, and right. That's a relatively new word.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I understand. So do you, you said that when you got to Overstreet, people were mostly friendly. What are your memories of Overstreet, being at Overstreet and being one of only 5 black kids in the school?
Really?
What was that like?
Actually, it was quite good, because I don't remember or recall any name calling. I don't recall any fights. I don't recall anything negative. I don't recall anything negative. I don't.
Do you have any sense of why? You know, it kind of goes to questions about, well, about Starkville and what's Starkville like and what's the society.
I don't know. You know, I've thought about it. I don't know, maybe if I did recall, because maybe I just wasn't aware to think, or maybe it was just because as a kid, maybe I was just in my own world, and maybe I didn't notice because I didn't care. I don't know, but I didn't. I just didn't recall. And some of the kids that were there, even as we went through high school, nobody ever said that they even had. As a matter of fact, the news anchor person, Andrea Self, her husband and his family, they were going there at that time. Okay. And I don't recall any of them having any bad experiences. I can't say they did or did, but I don't recall them having any.
Now, do you remember any contrast, or what contrast do you recall with when you had gone to Henderson Elementary, which I assume was a segregated school, right?
Henderson was all black.
Okay, and then you go to Overstreet. You might have been too young at that time, but do you have any memories of what Henderson was like?
I do.
By contrast?
I do. It was good. It wasn't bad, but it was different somehow. I think different there was a lot more discipline that was obvious. Where at Overstreet, I never noticed a lot of disciplinary things going on. You know, you just go into class, you sit down, you do whatever it is you do. At lunch, you go to lunch. At recess, you go out. Art, music, you go there. That was it. But at Henderson, It wasn't anything bad, but it's just that there was always a presence of discipline. You know, you had to be on your P's and Q's because you would be in trouble, and they would tell your parents, and you did not want that.
Right.
You did not want that.
So, can you also clarify for me? So Henderson Elementary, was that the Rosenwald school that was behind?
That right? It's called
the high school.
I think they call it Rosa Stewart now.
Okay.
I think they call it Rosa Stewart.
Okay.
It's the building with the cafeteria in it.
Okay. That's behind Henderson High.
Right.
Well, what used to be Henderson.
Right, and at that time, that was 1st through 5th grade.
Okay.
And then at Ward, the one in the back, that was 6th through 8th. And then Henderson was 9 through 12.
Okay. Thank you. And then Henderson was 9 through 12.
Now, I do recall by it being all the grades there on that one campus, you always got to see other kids that were older and younger all the time, where at the other schools you just only saw people that were in your age group.
Right, right, right. And what effect do you think that had, being all together like that, a big group of people where you've got little kids and teenagers?
I don't know, I don't remember an effect, because you were usually separated. So, you know, if the elementary kids were doing something at one time, then the other grades, they would be not either in that environment or would come at a later time, but you would just see each other in passing mostly. So I don't know if it has some type of effect or not.
So then obviously after you went to Overstreet, you went on probably to middle school and then high school at Starkville High. So we've talked to several people now who were kind of in that first class or two of African Americans who went to Starkville High. And I'm wondering, so by the time you would have gotten there, it would have been like well into the 70s.
Right.
You've been integrated for a time.
Right. I started Starkville High at, let's see, 1975, I think. It was 1975.
And what was Starkville High like at that point?
Starkville High was good. We all got along pretty well, I would imagine. But I think in terms of, when I think back to my years at Starkville High, and because of the period of time we were in, we were still in that period of time when, you know, most of the class position, they were mostly held by whites. But as I got closer to graduation, that started to change. And of course, you can go and look at all of the annuals and see, like, of course, Mr. and Mrs. SHS, that would have been white. Mr. and Starkville High, class president, that was white. But as I got closer to graduation, you started to see more and more blacks in a lot of. So it didn't really take that long time before it kind of averaged out, I guess you would say.
And do you have any sense of about how integrated was the school while you were there? About what percentage?
Now, by the time I made it to Starkville High, that's where everybody went to school, black and white. So it was just, that was where you went.
Okay.
So.
And I think Starkville was around maybe a third African American or more at that time.
I think it might have been a little more, maybe a little more than a third.
But it would have been a very integrated school.
Absolutely. Even with the teachers as well.
Oh, that's interesting too.
So I really don't have bad experiences from school as far as race or, it's just, it just developed. I had good teachers there. And I mean, I still know them now, still communicate with them when I see them. So, good experience.
That's good. Nothing about that. So what do you remember too about the town as you got older and the relationship? Like, you had some interesting things to say about the relationship between the town and the university in the 60s and 70s and you came to our panel. And so what do you remember about the town as you were, because Octok, you're sort of living on the outskirts of town.
Right.
But what do you remember about Starkville as a place as you're kind of going through the 60s and 70s?
I remembered Starkville to be, and again, I'm going back to how I saw it then, but I probably have a different interpretation now when I look back of maybe what I saw, I don't know, but I saw it as a fairly friendly, easy to live in place. And while we always heard stories about race as it pertained to white people, I always wondered, and I hope this doesn't sound bad, but I always wondered if Starkville somehow attracted more intelligent white people, because what we always heard white people were, you didn't really see that a lot. Now, that didn't mean they were or were not, but you just didn't see that a lot.
And when I say what people, can I get you to clarify what you heard white people were?
Well, you know, it's the typical stuff. Well, you know, they don't like black people, and they don't want to see black people get ahead, and you know, they're not going to help you. Just general kind of things. But I have a different interpretation of what that means to me today. But I understood what it meant back then too. But it just didn't. For example, when I went to Overstreet again, I immediately made friends with a little girl, and I cannot remember her last name, because if I did, I'd be trying to look her up right now. But her name was Laura. And we did everything together. And I'm assessing the whole time that we're friends, like, wow, you don't look like what they said white people are supposed to look like. You don't say the stuff that they say to white people. But she wasn't from Starkville originally either. Her parents taught here.
Yeah.
So now that I'm older, I says that probably had something to do with it. So every day after school, we would walk together. We walked to a certain point to Main Street. She would go left to go home, and I'd go right to go to where my mom was going to pick us up. And I remember one day we were walking down the street, and I said, hey, let's go to the drugstore, because then there was a soda fountain in the drugstore. I said, let's go to the drugstore, and I'll buy you something. And she says, okay. So we go, and on the way, my grandfather was coming down the street. I said, oh, well, we don't have to buy it. Here's my grandfather. He'll buy it for us. And she said, no. She said, you can't ask a white man for money. I said, it's not a white man. It's my grandfather. She said, no, that's a white man. And that just threw me for a loop. That she would tell me I didn't know my grandfather. And I said, well, okay, watch. And she just stopped walking like, I don't know how this is going to play out. So obviously she had heard something at home maybe as to what black and white was. I don't know. Yeah. But when I asked him, and he says, well, tell your friend to come. and she was like, well, I don't really know. But she eventually came and she said, well, how did you get a white grandfather? I said, he's not white. But I didn't know how to explain to her why he looked that way. Yeah. But I just thought that was always really weird. Yeah. How that day she told me, well, you can ask a white man for money. It's like, okay. All right. But anyway, you know, I didn't think too much about it afterwards, because, you know, I guess kids don't hold on to that kind of stuff, but it's just weird.
Yeah. Somehow she put you in a different category than him, and
right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then you and him didn't. It just didn't.
Right. So it probably messed up her concept of what black and white was doing.
She was confused.
Right.
So are there any other things you remember about Starkville as you got older, and what the town was like?
Well, I have loved living here. I've enjoyed being around the people that are here. I think Starkville has a lot to offer, and I think they do offer a lot in ways. And I think Mississippi State is what really helps make it be what it is. And I think the campus offers a lot to the residents. is. And I think we'd totally be at a loss without it.
Now, when you came to our panel, you mentioned too that, like your parents, a lot of African-American people in town and around town work for the university. And
They did.
can you give us any sense of what you think the relationship was between, because like while your parents were working here, for at least part of that time, African-American people couldn't attend school here. So what was the relationship like between like your parents and your grandparents and their friends and the university?
I'm not sure. Pretty much how you see it today in the support staff, that's how it is. And what I know, excuse me, I'm sorry. If you don't mind, excuse me. I'm trying to work out, I'm trying to clear this up. But anyway, I guess as with anything, it all boils down to the individual and what you want out of life. Because my mother graduated high school. She always wanted to go to college, but she didn't for whatever reason. I don't know. Maybe she got married, had kids. I don't know what it was. I guess we should ask her and find that out. But when my parents worked here, their whole objective, and these were like jobs they got coming right out of school, but my parents always told me their whole objective was to keep advancing best they could. So when my mother worked here in the laundry, and she started working over at the cafeteria, she heard about a job in town at Garrett, at the local shirt factory, where she could earn more money. So she applied, and she tells us this story about how her supervisor, tried to prohibit by even calling down to Garrett, asking those people to not hire her. But the lady hired her anyway, and she went on through there to become, a supervisor in that. Then she left that and entered into the field of social work, and that's what she did for the past 30 or 40 years. So even though my parents started here, they continued over time to try to advance, where some other people, they stayed here. Now their children have followed right in their footsteps, working in these same support jobs.
Yep, yeah. And your parents used it as a stepping stone to go other places. Right. Yeah. Do you know what is the appeal of working for the university?
Well, I think maybe back then it was just, I don't think it was an appeal. I think it's just that maybe in the support positions, black people knew, well, hey, they'll hire us for this, but not for something else. So they just went where I guess they could go, they were guaranteed to get a job. I would imagine that might have been it, because I can't really say that I see an appeal in coming to work for 20 or 30 years cooking, unless there's just something you got a great passion for, or picking up trash on campus.
Right.
So
it might be a place to start, but then you move on.
Right.
Yeah, I understand. I'm kind of also thinking about some remarks you made when you came to our panel. Kind of thinking back again to your mom and protesting in the streets and everything. You talked a little bit about how people organized and how, like, your mom got involved, like how she knew what was going on and how she knew what was happening, and how protest activities got kind of off the ground and launched.
Well, again, I've always known my mom to be involved. She was always involved with NAACP or, and churches back then were just like, churches were like the old school version of Facebook. All you needed was to tell one person, and you got on your calling list, and in a few minutes, everybody knew everything. So I tease my daughter now and say, I don't get it. Everybody walks around with a cell phone now. Because usually I don't have one, I don't carry one. Half the time I don't know what it is, and that's why I didn't put a number on you, because I don't know what it is. But I tell my daughter, everybody walks around with a cell phone. Everybody you call, their phone says voicemail's not been set up, or you go to a voicemail. And you gotta wait 2 or 3 days for somebody to call you back. I said, but back then we had a party line telephone, which meant if you picked it up, somebody else was on it, you couldn't use it. You would have to say to them, hey, you guys, I need to use phone. I have something important I need to do. And they would get off the phone, and you dial 2 or 3 people, tell them they dial 2 or 3 people. And in an hour or so, you could have 100 people gathered at a location.
Yeah.
So it didn't take long. And I think everybody believed in whatever it was that you, and people trusted each other. And that's just the reason I think it worked the way that it did. Where now if you call people, oh, I got something to do, I have this appointment, nothing really, those kinds of, I won't say nothing, those kinds of things may not be a priority, because people have so many interests in. Back then, everybody's interest was pretty much the same. We want fairness, we want equality, we want better wages. So everybody pretty much was in the same boat.
Yeah. And now, a lot more agendas.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I understand. Do you have any idea of how your mom got involved in the NAACP? And like, I know the chapter here didn't form until 1969, so it's pretty late. And what inspired her to?
Again, I think it probably went back to her father always telling, and I think that may have been the impetus for him working for himself a lot, is that he did not want his kids to be treated as second-class citizens. So I think he realized that in order to protect them from that, he would need to earn for them so that they wouldn't necessarily have to earn from others. And I remember my mom telling us a story once that her mother wanted, because her mom didn't work like a lot of the women did, because my grandfather said that, you know, you don't have to go out there and do that. I'll take care of my wife and my kids. But my mom said my mother wanted to earn some extra money to do something. I think her oldest sister wanted to learn to sew, and she wanted a sewing machine. So my grandmother decided she would work outside the home to earn this money and get the sewing machine for her. So she decided she would do washing and ironing for some white people. And it's a funny story, because my mom say her mother got all of them and says, okay, you guys, y'all gonna help me wash and iron these clothes. So their mom would wash and they would iron. And, you know, because my mom had worked in a laundry, she knows how to.
Yeah. She can iron.
She can start shirts and pants and they can stand up. Yeah. She can iron. So my mom say they washed the clothes, the ladies' clothes, and they hung them on the line to dry. And my mom said we had goats. And she says, you know, goats will eat anything. And the goats ate all the ladies' stuff. And say, my grandmother was saying, oh my God, how am I going to tell this lady that the goats ate her clothes? And we don't have... So when my grandfather came home, she said, she was kind of afraid to tell her granddad that the goats had eaten this lady's clothes. But when she told him, he told her, go talk to the lady, find out how much she wants for the clothes. I'm going to give you the money, and don't you go wash your clothes for anybody else. So my mom said that was the end of working outside the house for somebody else after the goats ate those clothes. So I don't know. I think that's why, you know, he worked for himself. And from the stories that he told, and then too, I didn't know it then, but I have a totally different view of what might have been going on now. But when we were kids, we spent a lot of time with my grandfather. And a lot of police-related people would always come to his house. And we'd always be curious, what are they always out there talking to people about? And, you know, now we know better about how law enforcement would always go to certain people in the neighborhood if they wanted to know certain things. And I would always remember my grandfather coming back inside, and he would always say, can't tell these people everything they want to know. But then there were people who would tell them what they wanted to know. So, I don't know. But whatever.
But he did not have an antagonistic or a hostile relationship.
No, it was never anything bad. You know, when we would hear people say, oh, I don't want them around my house, but people just kind of come. A lot of people kind of came and went at my grandfather's house. It wasn't just them. So I think that's kind of maybe how my mother kind of got involved in it, because my grandfather, he just always told us, you know, you don't have to be afraid of anybody. You don't have to feel less than anybody. And
So now what about your father in all of this? It sounds like your mom was the one who really was the mover and shaker in your family.
well, my mother is the one that took the more organized approach. It's like, okay, let's go to a meeting, let's participate in a boycott. Where my father, he was probably more I'm not going down there marching. If they come on my land, I'm shooting. You know, he was that kind.
I understand.
He was that kind.
I understand.
And you know, he was the take no prisoners kind of person. You know, my mom would be like, well, you know, that's not necessary. You know, you can better achieve this agenda doing it this way.
That's great. That's great.
But yeah, my dad would be in there, but you know, his approach wasn't quite nonviolent.
I understand. He had an offensive defense.
Right. It's like, I'm staying over here and minding my business, and I advise you to do the same. That was his approach.
So you mentioned the churches, and I'm going back to look at, I'm not recalling the exact name of the church that your grandmother was.
It was Ebenezer.
It's Ebenezer.
Ebenezer Baptist Church.
Do you recall, like, clearly you said that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to
that's
mess
okay.
up your
Clearly you suggested that the churches, like the call lists and the membership of the churches, really effective at turning people out.
Right.
Because everybody knows each other.
Right.
So do you have any sense of what role, if any, the churches, like the church your family went to, played in getting people out? Like, did ministers support what you were doing? Do you have any recollection of, like, being preached at regarding like joining the movement or protesting or anything like that?
For the most part, my recollection would have been ministers in the churches did encourage the members to, you know, let their voices be heard through these different outlets. And occasionally we would hear our parents talking about, and, you know, if you were one of those members, one of those ministers who discouraged your members from participating, they didn't like you very much. So you know, there were a few ministers that didn't, but the majority did. They participated themselves, and they encouraged members to participate, you know, through various, you know, everybody didn't do the exact same, but everybody participated, I guess, in the way they felt comfortable.
Would you like to jump in at all, Michael? Do you have anything you want to?
How were, I guess, at Starkville High School, how were, extracurricular activities? Were they pretty integrated, or because I've heard stories about how there were still segregated there was still a segregated prom until the 80s, and I was just wondering if maybe like senior superlatives at the end, you know, at the end of your high school years, and athletics and things like that, if it was.
Now, my recollection of that at Starkville High is, and I guess I didn't think of prom because I've never been that kind of social person, you know, like parties and that kind of thing. So now that you mention that, I didn't go to a prom. I never wanted to go to a prom and never thought about going to one. So now that you mention, maybe I'd have to go back and ask some of my friends, hey, did you go to prom? And but I think it was 2 separate proms at that time. But everything else, whether it was cheerleaders, black and white cheerleaders, if it was football, basketball, black and white. So I don't know what would account for a black and a white prom, because I never thought about that till now. Because I guess that was just never anything I ever participated in. So I don't know what could account for that. You know, why they could be, participate together in everything else, and then that one thing was separate. And I know of recent, there's been a lot of stuff in the news and a few movies made about these separate proms. So,
Yeah, there have been.
but I guess as far as I can tell, prom must be a really big thing with white people, more than it is with black. Now, black kids look forward to going to prom, but I just, you know,
Not that big.
I don't think they could go or not go. I don't think they would really. They go because it's there to go to. It's not like I gotta have a prom to go to. At least that's the way I interpret it. So I don't know. And you know, thinking about it right now as you talk to me, maybe when white kids are young and going to prom, maybe subconsciously that's their early initiation into, you know, secret society kind of stuff. I don't know. Because I couldn't, now that you mentioned, I don't understand how is it that you can do everything else together and then suddenly this one event is not academic, it's not career oriented, it doesn't really serve any purpose other than, to me, it's just a celebration. So why? But it doesn't bother me because I believe that people should have the right to separate if they choose. And my sister and I, we always explain to my daughter as, when you go home, you may not want to entertain guests this weekend. That doesn't mean you're a bad person. That doesn't mean you dislike me. That doesn't mean anything except you just don't want to entertain guests this weekend. And you have that right. So if a group of people wish to start an organization, have a club, have an event, and they say, well, we only want our kind of people in it, I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't. Now, when it comes to making your community work, and you say, well, I only want to hire a certain kind, I can kind of see how that could pose a problem. But when people go off into their social lives or what, I don't see anything like the big issue with sororities and fraternities. I don't see anything wrong with all white sorority. I don't.
Now, does your daughter feel the same way?
I think she does. I think she does because we try to tell her that doesn't make a person racist because they want their own. They just, for example, and I'm just going to be really real. You may have a conversation with your spouse, and it could be about your neighbor. Now, you're not going to have that conversation about your neighbor if she's sitting right there at the table with you.
No, right.
You're not going to do it.
Right.
So the way I look at that is, sometimes when people form an affinity group, they have something in common that they wish to do and talk about. Just because you can't, or they say you are not allowed, doesn't, they should just have a right to be in their little group. Now, if the purpose of this group is to, all right, we're all white people, we're going to get together, we're going to go out here and we're going to plan some kind of strategy agenda against black people, I say, no, bust it up. But if they just want to do their thing because they want to do their thing, I don't see anything wrong with it. I don't see anything wrong with it. So sometimes I think we make things about race when really it may not really be about race.
So how do you think, again, I remember that day you talked a little bit about your daughter and how her generation is, in certain respects, well, obviously a little bit similar to you, she's your daughter, but also different than where you were in your place and time. And so how do you see, like, watching your daughter grow up in Starkville and going to Mississippi State? How do you see her experiences compared to your own?
I would really like to say they are probably the same. And when I say same, anything that I've ever set out to achieve in Starkville, I haven't met with any opposition that would say it was race related. You know, if it was an opposition or problems, that's just what it would have been regardless of who would have done it. And I also think, well, I know, the less informed you are, the more closed-minded you are, the more likely you will see things in terms of a problem, whether a problem exists or not. And that's one thing I stress with my daughter. I said, when you have a limited view of the world and you fear going outside that area that you feel comfortable with, rather than owning up and saying, hey, I don't feel so comfortable venturing into something that's different. When really the problem is just different. And I don't either I don't relate or I don't understand. People will turn that and say, well, okay, if I perceive any hint of rejection, I'm going to immediately label this as this horrible thing. And I'm going to start a campaign and we're going to let everybody know. And that's really not what's going on. And when I look back over my life, all the things that either I failed to achieve or chose to go another way because maybe one way wasn't working, I look back at it, it was just simply a lack of knowing what to do, how to do it, where to go, how to approach it. It had nothing to do with anything else.
Yeah, I understand.
So I do believe that racism exists, but I don't believe everything is racism that people say is racism. And I think a lot of people use that term indiscriminately because in order to, and you know, you even hear it coming from whites now, they'll say, well, you know, sometimes it's reverse racism. But I mean, you really have to know what the real definition of racism is. You have to be the race that holds the superior position in the society. I can't be racist toward you. Now, I cannot like you, I can have a prejudice toward you, but I can't be racist toward you because my race does not hold the position of superiority in American society. So I tell my daughter, first you need to understand the words that you're using. So.
I understand. I had a thought in my mind and I couldn't think about where I went. Oh, I know. So you talked at the start about how you've traveled other places and then you came back to Starkville. So can you give us some hint about where you went and what brought you back and how that being away has affected your perspective on life here and just your life in general, perhaps?
I think it definitely has affected my perspective about life in general. Probably to the point that a lot of my peers or associates that haven't gone away, they probably think I'm some kind of curmudgeon. This is all, you got weird thoughts about things. But I remember when I was a kid, now my mother's family, they believed in education a lot. So,
Yeah, it sounds like.
you know, you got bragging rights every time you got a degree for something. So I remember my cousins when I was little, they would always talk about how backwards, oh, y'all are so backwards, y'all are so country. And I couldn't see that. And we would just have these debates and you know, I would just fight tooth and nail for Starkville
And no,
and the
you're-
South and Mississippi and
Now,
and-
where were your cousins from?
well, they were from all over,
Okay.
California,
Okay, gotcha.
um, Illinois, Maryland, just,
Yep.
even though, you know, Maryland's considered a southern state, but I don't know what they're talking about. But anyway, you know, we would just get into these knockdown drag outs about Mississippi is not backwards and, but then as I started to go away, I still don't think they're backwards, but I see what they saw now. I could come back here now, and I totally felt like I was a fish out of water. My conversation didn't make sense with my friends anymore. So that kind of fell by the wayside a little bit. Everything that they thought was racism, I did. So now it's like, oh, you over there with them now. It's not about being with anybody. I'm just saying, I don't see that. And it was really a shock. And I tell my daughter, you are going to see it. I said, I don't know how to describe it to you, but when you leave and you come back, you're going to say, how did I live here in the middle of this? It's quite interesting.
So are you then encouraging, it sounds like you're encouraging your daughter to go away for a while.
I am, and not just out of Mississippi, but to take a global perspective, just go around. Then you'll start to see how people view Americans. Then it won't just be about black and white. Then it'll just be about, oh, you're from the U.S. And, you know, some people will receive that kindly, others not so much. So, but it's just a matter of exposure as to what you ultimately end up taking away from it. And I now know that a lot more achievement is possible when you're open-minded about things, as opposed to when you box yourself in. It's kind of like the little story they tell about the fish that was trying to get the food on the other side of the divider, and after so many tries, he pretty much just gave up. And then when the food was really accessible, he didn't try for it.
Yeah.
So I think that's what happens when you live a boxed life like that. You live that all your life. After you get about 50 years old, you don't even worry about it. You just accept defeat and say it's the other people.
Yeah.
And what it really amounts to is I really just didn't have the tools, or I didn't get put on the right track or pointed in the right direction. But I can even change that now. It's just like going back to school here. I don't have to do that. I do that because I choose to. You know, because I know I can. I can be 55 and I can come out here and I can be just as smart as these 20-year-olds.
Oh, absolutely. We have no doubt. You might work harder to do that.
So, you know, had I probably not developed this mindset, I'd have been like everybody, well, 55 is too old. It's too old, you shouldn't go. But,
Now, how far did you get when you started?
sophomore.
Okay. See, yeah. Do you have to start, did they make you start all the way from scratch?
And you just pick, and I have taken like a class here or there, never just on a full-time, while I was doing other things. So, I don't know, it should take me about 2 years, maybe a year and a half. I just want to do it because I can. No particular reason.
No. Now, what brought you back to Starkville after you'd been away? And how long had you been away from town?
Let's see, I think my first time I left Starkville was, I don't know, maybe the early 80s. I went to California. And when I got to California, I don't know, I might have been about 20 or 21. The first thing I wanted to do when I got there, I said I was either going to enroll in school or I was going to look for a job. So I was living with my brother. And I thought about it. I said, well, if I wanted to go to school, I guess I got to stay at home to do that. So I decided I would look for a job. And so that I could learn my way around LA, which is 10 times bigger than here. And I said, well, I'm gonna take the bus and I'm just gonna ride around, just all over this place, to see what's here. So I got on a bus at a bus stop and I had a magazine and a lady was sitting across from me, and for whatever reason, she just started talking to me. And as I started talking, and she said, so where are you from? And I said, Mississippi. She said, oh, really? And then she started telling me the guy driving the bus was her husband. And she said, oh, we're from the South. And I think she was telling me Louisiana or somewhere. And we just started talking, and she said, so she started asking me general subjects, like, where do you go to church? Where do you do? So I told her I just moved there. I didn't go to church any place, and all this kind of stuff. And as time went on, we kind of made friends. And then she said, so what are you doing? I said, well, I'm out just riding around trying to, you know, find out where everything is, how to get there, and then I'm going to start looking for a job. She said, oh, I can help you with a job. And I say, well, what kind of job? She said, how would you like to work for an airline? And I was like, yeah, I like going places. So I told her, yeah, that would be great. She said, well, if you give me a resume, my company is hiring. At that time, TWA was still flying. I gave her the resume. A week later, they called me for an interview, and I got the job. So I worked for TWA as a reservation sales agent for about 2 months. Then, right down the street, American Airlines had a center. So I said, well, let me go see what kind of jobs American Airlines had. So they had a job opening for a reservations training person. So I applied for that job, and I got that job. So I was like, ooh, I like this. And that was when I actually started traveling, when I worked for American.
Oh, yeah, because they used to, well, I think they still do, but yeah.
Well, it was a lot more liberal back then than, you know, you could take your family, your friends, you could do all that good stuff. So one night my sister called me. She was living in Georgia. She says, you know, I just saw a job advertised in the Atlanta Journal for American Express. She said American Express is going to be hiring people that work in the travel industry. And I said, well, send me some information on it. Back then, we weren't emailing, it was regular mail. So she sent me the ad, it was in a newspaper. And I called it, and the guy said, can we fly you down for an interview? And I said, sure. So I went, I got offered the job on the spot, and he said, the job that I wanted wasn't open. He says, but if you're open to taking a job in our business training center, you know, if that job comes available, we will offer it to you. So that's pretty much how it happened. And
then you moved to Georgia.
So I moved to Georgia, and I worked for American Express, traveled for, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years. And through that job, I just went everywhere. I just pick a place and say, ooh, I wonder what it's like here. And
Get on a plane.
you just go into human resources, fill out the paperwork, and because we were travel, they didn't prohibit you traveling because that was an asset for you being able to help their card members to know about all this stuff. And I just thought that was the coolest thing because I could take any amount of time off and travel to all these different countries. And, you know, now electronic funds transfer, that's common with everybody. But all I had to do, every city that I touched down in, if I needed money or needed my paycheck, I just go into an American Express office and they just count out the money, just like, cool, I like this.
That's great.
So
So you went all over the world. It sounds
yeah,
like you
just
traveled.
doing a lot of stuff. So I'm getting ready, now that my daughter's getting older, I'm getting ready to refire. Go and do it all over again, because that was way back then. So I'm sure a lot of things have changed now. So next year we're shooting for Morocco.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we're going
That sounds
check
good.
out Morocco and see what that's all about.
And have you been there before? No.
I haven't. I want to ride a camel. I want to drive a deep Jeep in the desert. I want to do all that stuff.
I haven't been to Morocco. I wanted to go to Morocco too,
So,
but I haven't been there.
so
Well, that's neat.
So I like what I did, even though I probably should have stayed in school, but
But it sounds like you had a pretty successful career.
I did. And then when I came back here to Starkville, I opened a Curves franchise, Curves for Women. I did that, and that was in, what, like, maybe the early 90s? Maybe about 90, I don't know, maybe 95, maybe, I don't know.
So you were gone for at least about 14, 15 years. You were gone for a while.
Yeah. So I've enjoyed my life. I don't have any regrets.
So if, I see the time, kind of to try to wrap things up, and I'll ask Michael too if he has any other questions. Where do you see things going in the future? Like, where does Starkville stand now, and especially as your daughter's going through school? I mean, what do you see coming up in the future, and what do you think still needs to be kind of rectified? You know, how do you see Starkville today? How do you see the schools today?
Well, how I see the schools today is, in terms of race, I don't think I really see a serious problem. I would like to see Starkville Public Schools maybe raise their standards for how they educate the kids for the future, because while they say, oh, we're getting an A in this and that, and we're passing at this level, to be honest, I can't say that I really believe that, because there are far too many kids that are falling by the wayside. And I don't put that solely on Starkville Public Schools, because I know, you have to have some help from home somewhere to make you value wanting a better education, because as my dad used to tell us when we went to school, the teachers cannot knock a hole in your head and pour it in there. You have to do some of the work. So now, what does it take to get parents more involved? I can't necessarily say I know the answer. I have some ideas on it, but I don't know if that would work. But I would like to see them raise the standard. And my thing is, if you want to be in school, you should demonstrate that you want to be in there. And in terms of where I see Starkville in the future, if the standards aren't raised, I see a Starkville that will, it's not going to advance rapidly enough, because if I make something accessible, and I'm going to use a business analogy. When a business owner sets a price for his product or service, we all know the higher the price, it has a higher perceived value. So if somebody offers you a Rolex versus a Timex, they both will tell the same time. But one has a higher perceived. Why? Because the other one is spoken of in terms of its craftsmanship, the intricacy of the working parts. A lot of prep has gone into that. So we can let our school systems be a Timex. We'll get you in and we'll get you out. Or do you want it to be a Rolex, where kids walking across that stage, they can come out here? And I was appalled to find that how many kids coming out of Starkville High have to be remediated coming into first year. You've only been 3 months, or just from May to June, from high school to college, and you need remediation. Something's wrong. Something wrong. They should be able to, and I hear this, oh, well, my child is going to junior college to get the basics. English is English. I don't care where you go. English should be no different at a junior college than it is here. So what basics are you talking about? And every school is going to require you to have some type of fundamental math, regardless of your major. They have that here. So now they're offering free junior college. I'm not opposed to that, because somebody may need that. But to make the academic path easy, I think that's setting us up for being able to be easily dominated in the future by not only whites, but anybody. Whites will be dominated if they're in the same system. So I think if you want to be in school, you should prove that you want to be there by meeting a certain, if you don't meet it, they should have something else for you to do. In China, you know, you have to 8th grade to prove your worth. If you don't make it by then, you go get a job and everybody else can go on to school.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
So I believe the access should be there, but you should, so if the state is going to allow you free books, free bus to ride on, free school, least you can do is show up and do the work.
I understand. Michael, do you have questions?
No,
Joyce, are there any other things that we haven't thought about that you want to talk about, or things that you want to expand upon? I try to get a good deal of your life so that we kind of get it all on record.
No, other than, you know, I guess I can't stress this enough, and that is, for a better future, you have to start working on that today. We can't wait until the future. We can't wait till 10 years and say, this is what we need. We have to be smart enough today to see what the needs will be in 10 years and work on that. So when 10 years arrive, we're ready for the challenges at 10 years. And to sit and talk about what can't be done and why it can't be done, to me that's like suicide, because that's what life is about, problem solving. You know, because if it weren't for problem, I mean, if I had my way, I'd already reached my millions. Still working on it, but you know, nobody's going to come and give it to me. So, you know, I have to figure out, you know, what avenue I can pursue to achieve that. So, if we don't start today creating the Starkville that we want it to be in the future, we'll find ourselves in the future with the same Starkville we have today. And then the other cities and states that are progressive will have moved on, and they'll look totally different than the way we look. And it will look funny to the world to say, gee, these people sit there with a major university with all of these smart minds, but the citizens
Are behind.
it doesn't look right. And that was what I stressed with my daughter running for Justice Court Judge. At first, because of her age, people said, oh, well, the guy that she's running against, he's been up there a long time. Okay. A lot of people have been in a position a long time and they lose. I'm not going to say she's win or lose, we're going to go out there and do our best. But the point is, there is no reason to fear that he's been there a long time, because he too had the first time to be there. And by you running, even if you lose, you're giving somebody else confidence enough to believe in themselves that they can do it. Because until now, and I went back to look up the history of Justice Court judges, and for hundreds of years, Thibault County has never had a female to even run, let alone to be up there. So hundreds of years later, here's a 20-year-old black college kid. And she's received an awful lot of support from a lot of people. And believe it or not, the majority of the support, they're coming from people that possess that open mind. Because the others are saying things like, well, you know, this person has influence. And so, you know, it's that. So I think Starkville has the potential to really be a beacon in this region if they would just latch on to the progressiveness of Mississippi State and go for that amazing ride.
Well, then we should end on that note, because that's a totally, so why don't you I'll turn this off. Yeah, that's a